G'day everyone, my name's Leigh and I'm a professional poker player from Melbourne, Australia. About a year ago I started creating YouTube vlogs, tracking my progress as a professional poker player. We started off as a live 2-5 grinder, but because of everything that happened with coronavirus and the casino closing its doors, I did make the transition into the online poker grind, and at the moment we're playing 100 NL 9 max games. And to give you a little bit of a sample of what these games are like, I've got a session to review today. Very interesting hands we have to go over from the session. I don't want to waste any more time. Let's get into it. So here it is, the session that we played. As you can see, I did get in a total of 1,704 hands, which I'm absolutely stoked with because my goal usually is to play 1,500 hands. So to overshoot that by about 200 hands, I'm absolutely beaming. That's what I'm aiming for in a session. And you can see I did run pretty well across the session, winning 266, which is fine. I try not to focus on what the results are in terms of how I feel about a session. I choose to focus more so on one, the volume, the amount of hands I play, and two, the actual quality of my play, how good were the decisions I made across the session. And to give you a really good idea of what that was like, we've got some of the most interesting hand histories from today's session to really go in depth in terms of how I played across this session. So let's get into the hand histories now. So first hand up, I think it's actually one of the first hands I played in the session just because we're only four-handed. So at this point, I'm still waiting for the table to fill up. Regardless, I'm in the cutoff with Queen 6 of spades. I go ahead and open it up to 3, and then an unknown player in the big blind calls. So we go heads up to a flop of Jack 10-5 rainbow. Big blind checks it over to me, and in this spot with the backdoor flush draw, I think this is a really good spot for me to see bet bluff. We could potentially get our opponent to fold the ace high and king high hands in their range if we go a bit bigger. But even if they do float with some of those weaker hands or stronger hands like pairs, we do have a lot of backdoor equity to improve this hand. Like if the turn's a spade or a 9 or an ace, they're going to be great cards for us to keep barreling on as a bluff. So because of that, I go ahead and c-bet 5. And then the big blind does call. So off to the turn. The turn's 6 of diamonds. Big blind checks it over to me again. It's a pretty good turn for us. We do make a pair here. That really makes me want to slow down. If my opponent did float the flop with a straight draw or ace high, we're already ahead of those hands. So there's no use in bluffing them off of one of those. And even if they do have any pair that's stronger than ours, I really do think they're going to be pretty likely to continue calling. Maybe they'd fold a 10 or pocket 8s, but I don't really want to, start trying to bet them off those specific hands when we do have a lot of showdown value with our pair. So I go ahead and check it. Then we're off to the river. The river is a repeat jack of diamonds, and then the big blind leads out. They go ahead and make it 11. Now the action's on me, and I think this is a pretty interesting decision, whether we want a hero call or not. Definitely lose to a lot of things. Any jack is trips. My opponent could be potentially going for thin value with a 10, and I do believe that they might have backdoored a flush or slow played a hand like Jack 10 or pocket 5s. Having said that though, if I think they could have backdoored a flush here, they're going to be floating the flop with so much random air. Like say they got to the river with ace 2 of diamonds. Okay, they could have ace 2 of diamonds. They could also have ace 2 of clubs, right? Because that's a backdoor flush as well on the board. They could have ace 2 of spades. They could have ace 9 of spades, ace 8 of spades. There's so many combinations they could potentially have here that is just air that I think I have to call, because if they're using even a fraction of those air hands as a bluff in this spot, then we're going to be ahead with our single pair here. So even though this is a spot where ranges are pretty wide and they do have a lot of value, I also think they have a lot of bluffs. And getting this price, I'm going to throw in the call. And that's what I do. Then we do get to see what the opponent had. 9-8 offsuit. So they did have an open-ended straight draw that they chose to bluff with, and I'm glad I called them off and caught their bluff. Next hand, I'm in early position with pocket 8s. I go ahead and open it up to 3. And the action gets to a tight aggressive player in the cutoff, and they go ahead and 3-bet it to 12. The action folds back to me, and I think I have a pretty easy decision to call in this spot. Whilst in general, I don't like calling 3-bets out of position, especially when they're larger sized 3-bets. I think we can make an exception in this instance, and it's only because we are so deep effective with the villain over 200 big blinds. There's going to be so much money to play for post-flop that I don't mind even paying off a bigger bet pre-flop here. So I throw in the call, and then we get to see a flop. That is a banger flop if I ever saw one. 8-6 deuce rainbow. We have top set here, and I actually do something a bit unconventional in this spot. I decided to lead out for 9. I don't think this is necessarily a good play. I think on a board like this in a 3-bet pot, we're going to get a lot more value by check raising because our opponent is going to c-bet the flop with most of their over pairs and then some bluffs as well. But I chose to lead out here because I played another 3-way pot, and where they opened on my big blind and I called, and then the small blind called in between, and the small blind led out for all 3 streets. And then as the pre-flop raiser, this villain actually called them down with ace high. So maybe they have a thing where they think leads are really weak. If I do this here, maybe they'll call me down with ace high. I think there is a bit of flawed logic, and I'm probably better just sticking to conventional poker and check raising this board. I decided to mix it up though. I mixed in a lead, and then my opponent actually goes ahead and raises, which, wow, I was not expecting that, but this lead has turned out better than I even thought it would. I think it's very likely my opponent has a bunch of overpairs in their range here, but I do also think it's possible they're bluffing. The lead does look very weird by me, but it could look like a bit of a protection-y bet with pocket 9s, which they could definitely try and bluff me off a hand like pocket 9s if they have ace king and they're like, okay, a lot of turn cards are going to be bad for pocket 9s, so I'll bluff them off later. So for that reason, I decide to call here. I think it's a great spot to trap. I think if I go ahead and 3-bet, I probably will get more value from their overpairs, but I really want to keep their bluffs in because I think they're going to commit a lot more money on streets that are going to be scare cards for if I had a hand like pocket 10s, pocket 9s. So this hand is a very, very meta one as we head into the turn, which is the jack of spades. I go ahead and check it over to the villain, hoping that they're going to try and bluff me off at 9s or 10s here. And they do put in a bet. They go ahead and bet 42.25. So the action's on me, and I could go ahead and check raise here to try and get max value from aces, but the thinking I said on the flop, it still applies here. If my opponent has ace king, ace queen, something like that, this is going to be a card they're going to continue bluffing on if they did take a bluff line on the flop. So I got to keep calling to keep trapping. I throw in the call, and then we're off to a river. The river is the ace of clubs. Now the action's on me here, and I do think there is some merit to just leading out for value here. And the only reason I say that is because I think if my opponent does have ace king or ace queen, there's a pretty strong chance that they will just check back the river, being concerned that, you know, maybe they'll figure out I have been trapping with a set, or maybe they think we're going to completely value own ourselves by betting ace queen here. I decided to check it over though. At the time, I thought my opponent would bet off ace king or ace queen, but looking back at it in retrospect, I think that's pretty unlikely. And the other benefit for checking it over is if my whole plan has been to induce bluffs by slow playing this, if my opponent somehow has a bluff, they're definitely going to rip it all in on this river, and then we beat those hands. So I check it over to them, and what do you know? They go ahead and rip it all in. We have the easiest snap call in the world. We actually do get to see what my opponent had, and it was king, queen of spades. So they had a complete bluff. They actually did turn a flush draw. Even though my line was super unconventional, it was sort of based on a bunch of meta reads I had against this opponent, it worked out in the exact best way possible for me. Having said that, you don't want to be results oriented in poker. So it's really unconventional. It's kind of tricky. I'm not quite sure how to feel about it. Next hand, the action gets to a tight aggressive cutoff. They go ahead and open it up to 3. Then I'm in the big blind with ace jack offsuit, and I decide to call here. I do think 3-betting makes sense as well, but as long as you're mixing in both plays sometimes, it's fine in my opinion. So we go heads up to a flop, and it is ace king 7 with 2 diamonds. I go ahead and check it over to the pre-flop raiser, and they c-bet 2.75, and the action's on me. I think we have a pretty easy decision to call here. One of the strongest hands we can have on this board is ace jack, but I can't go check raising it when my opponent definitely has all of the ace king combinations in their range. So we go to a turn, which is the 10 of clubs. I check it over to the aggressor again, and here's where the hand starts to get really interesting. They go ahead and bet 22.5, so almost 2 times the size of the pot, which is a really, really confusing play, in my opinion, just because if they did have one of the stronger hands in their range, like an ace king, pocket kings, king 10 suited, something like that, I don't know why they would want to bet this big. Like, don't you want me to call with my ace x hands? The fact that they're going so large on this turn, I really think they either have queen jack or a bluff. And like specifically queen jack, they don't even have ace king or pocket kings, like queen jack, the fact that they're using such a large sizing. So when the action's back on me here, I actually think this is a really good hand to call with, just because Ace Jack specifically has the Jack, which is going to slightly block the amount of combinations of Queen Jack my opponent has. They did open the cutoff, so they do have all the offsuit combos, so it's not as dramatic a blocker as it would be if I was against the under the gun player, but it's still a good blocker to have, so I do throw in the call. I will say though, I wouldn't fault people for just folding Ace Jack here, but against a more thinking opponent, if you are going to bluff catch, you really do want to use something that has a blocker and is a stronger hand in your range, and Ace Jack fits totally into that category. So we're heads up to the river. The river is the two of diamonds, completing the front door flush draw. I go ahead and check it over to the villain. Then they go ahead and bet 13. So a tiny bet on the river. And then the action's back on me here. And this is one of those spots. I have three options, and I think all of them suck. For one, I don't like calling because I'm almost positive that I'm behind. Folding sucks as well, getting such a good price. Like, it's so cheap. How can I fold? And then I don't like raising either because my opponent does have flushes in their range. They have straights in their range. They could be betting small to induce a bluff with a straight even. So I really don't like any three of the options. I ultimately land on a call, which I actually think is probably the worst out of the three options I possibly could have done. Realistically, I think this is probably just a good spot to fold. Like, they're not bluffing. You're behind. Don't waste your money. That's probably the best play. At the end of the day, I really don't want to go and try raising them off when they do have flushes and straights in their range. Probably better off just folding, even though the price is so good. But we do get to see what they had, and wouldn't you know, it was Queen Jack offsuit, so it makes sense why they overbet the turn. Alright, next hand we're in the low jack with pocket tens. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then the action gets to a loose passive player in the big blind. They go ahead and call. So we're heads up to a flop. It's A7-4, all spades. So they go ahead and check it over to us. And I think this is a good spot for me to c-bet. I'm going to be c-betting a lot on ace-high boards. But not only that, this hand actually benefits from a bet as well. I think we can get called by worse hands now. They probably won't call us later. Like if my opponent has 8-7, even without a spade, I think they're going to float one straight. And even if they do call with a stronger hand like an ace, we're going to have outs to improve to a flush. I go ahead and bet 2.5, and then the big blind calls. So off to the turn. The turn is the 5 of spades, so we get there with our flush draw, and the big blind checks it over to us. And now I think this is a pretty interesting decision whether you want to bet or not, because whilst we made our flush, we do lose to 3 stronger flushes. Actually, 5 stronger flushes if you include the straight flush combinations. So there is some stuff to be concerned about, but I still want to go ahead and bet for value here. I do think if my opponent has a hand like ace-8 with the 8 of spades, they're definitely going to call now. And there's a few 2-pair combinations. I'm assuming a loose passive player is calling out of the big blind pretty wide, so even if they had 7-4 offsuit, I wouldn't be that surprised. So I think there's absolutely merit to betting for value here, which is what I decide to do. I go ahead and make it 7, and then I do get a call. So heads up to the river, and the river, it's the ace of clubs, definitely not a good river for us, and things get even worse when the big blind decides to lead out for 35, so pretty big overbet of the pot. The action's on me here, and I do think it's somewhat possible that my opponent could be bluffing with the counterfeit 2 pair, something like 5-4, they're doing that because they block the full houses I could potentially have. Having said that, I really don't think they are. I think it's much more likely they do have a full house with like ace-7 offsuit, ace-5 offsuit, or even a straight flush or the king high flush would make a lot of sense as well when they do use this large overbet sizing. So when we only have a 10 high flush, a pretty easy decision for us to fold there, which is what we do. I do think if I had the king high flush, it'd be a much sicker spot, and I honestly probably would like to think I'd be able to get away from that hand. It's easy to say, it's harder to do in actual game, but I really think my opponent has so many full houses in their range. Okay, this next hand's definitely a doozy. The action gets to me in the hijack with queen 9 of diamonds. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then we get a call from another loose passive big blind. So we go heads up to a flop, ace-10-6 with 2 hearts. The action checks over to me here, and I decide to check it back though. I really think a loose passive play is going to have a lot of ace-x hands in their big blind calling range, and I'm just not really looking to try and bluff them that much. I think it might be a bit too aggressive. I think checking back, even on hands you have range advantage on, is a fine play, at least in my opinion. So we get to see a free turn, which is a jack of diamonds. Pretty good turn for us. We do make an open-ended straight draw, and the big blind leads out for the size of the pot. The action's on me here, and I think this is a pretty close decision too. I'm going to take semi-bluff raising completely off of the table here. I think my opponent has a lot of strong hands in their range here. They definitely have a lot of two pairs with the ace-x hands and all of the king-queen offsuit combos. So I think their range is pretty strong here. So I don't think I'm going to get many folds with a raise. So it comes between calling and folding. I think folding makes a lot of sense, even though we do have a lot of equity with our open-ended straight draw against the majority of villains' range. They definitely do have a bunch of straights here, which we do have to be concerned with. We can call, though, in position, having strong equity against a lot of hands in their range, which is ultimately what I land on. I do think there is merit to just folding here as well. As long as you're not bluff raising, I think both of those options make sense. So we get to see a river. The river is the 8 of spades, so beautiful river for us. We do river the straight. The action's on the big blind. They keep betting at it. They go ahead and bet the size of the pot again. Now the action's on me here, and I want to go ahead and raise the value. Like I said, I think my opponent has a lot of two-pair combinations, and being that they're a more loose passive type of player, I think those hands are definitely going to call a raise. So I do decide to raise it up. I go ahead and make it 99. Now I will say I think this sizing is far too large. I actually think going this big, it potentially could induce hero folds, even from a loose passive player. If they do have ace-10 and they see me being this big when there's a bunch of straights out there and better two pairs, I think it might scare them off. So pricing it down to about 60 makes a lot more sense in my opinion. But I made the mistake. I went ahead and made it 99. Then the action gets back to the big blind, and they go ahead and rip it all in. Absolutely gross spot for us here. My opponent has all of the king-queen offsuit combinations in their range, and I really don't think they're overvaluing a two-pair hand, and I think it's more likely they have the king-queen combos than they have the queen-9 combos, not only because we block it, but also because I think some of those queen-9s are probably just going to call my raise and not 3-bet themselves. So yeah, pretty easy fold for us if you really sit down and think about it. I know a lot of people might call here, being that we're so high up in our range, but I just don't think we have to worry about defending our range when our opponent clearly has the nuts, or at least they clearly have it in my opinion. So I do end up laying down the straight there. Pretty sick hand. Hop in the comments below, let me know what you think about that hand. Would you fold the river? Let me know. So that last hand didn't quite work out that well for us, but maybe things will change around in this hand. So the actions are on a loose aggressive early position player. They go ahead and raise up to 2.5. Then I'm in the hijack with my second favourite hand in all of poker, pocket kings. I make it 10. Then we get a cold call actually from a loose passive button. Then the action gets back to the original raiser. They call as well. So we go 3 ways to a flop. It's a banger flop. It is King Jack 3 with 2 diamonds. So we make top set for the second time in this vlog. So running pretty hot today. Then the actions on the early position player. They actually decide to lead out. So a bunch of leads today when there's a top set involved. But they decide to lead out for 28, which is music to our ears when we have the nuts, and I think we have a pretty interesting decision whether we want to raise or slow play. My favourite reason for just calling here is we do actually block a lot of my opponent's worst continue hands, like if they let out with king queen or even like king jack. Like we block that hand so hard that we're really only going to get value from flush draws and combo draws, which have like really good equity against us. So I really could see merit to either option. I decide to call. Could go either way. Then the action gets to the loose passive button, and wouldn't you know, they go ahead and rip it all in. It's a beautiful sight when someone rips it all in and you have the nuts, but the action gets back to the original player who led, and they decide to just call the person who went all in. So the action's back on me here, and I have a decision here. Do I want to go ahead and rip it all in to try and get called by a flush draw or a combo draw, or do I want to keep slow playing and give the early position player a bit of rope? I think between those two options, the better one is definitely to go ahead and rip it all in. I'm actually pretty indifferent to whether the early position does call with one of their nut flush or combo draw hands, just because their equity is pretty good against us. That even if they do fold one of those worst hands, we're pretty happy to get heads up with the button. But If we do rip it all in, we do get max value from King Jack and Pocket Threes and Pocket Jacks as well. So I do decide to raise it up. I effectively go all in by making it 203, and the action gets back to the early position player, and they put it all in for me. Easy snap call with their kings there. And then the board runs out. It's a 10 of diamonds on the turn, which is definitely a scare card. I definitely think we're going to be losing to a lot of nut flushes. This actually does block some of the combo draws, so it's a bit less likely that we're behind on this flush in particular, but definitely worried about the ace-x diamond hands. And then we get to see the river, 7 of spades, and we get to see our opponent's hands at this point. And the button did have ace-9 of diamonds, so they're going to win the main part with the nut flush draw. But if they have the nut flush draw, we know the other opponent doesn't have the nut flush draw because they have bottom set pocket threes, so pretty sick cooler on such a wet board. I mean, I feel like we're always going to get all in against the villain there when it's top set, bottom set, so pretty sick cooler for them. Pretty dope cooler for me though. So there you go. Those were the most interesting hands we played across the course of this session. But in terms of my quality of play, my gameplay grade, I'm going to go with a B+. I really wanted to give myself an A from today's session, but it was just those few mistakes holding me back. That hand with the Ace-Jack where I missed a good opportunity to hero fold to the overbet, and that slightly too large of a sizing on the river with the Queen 9 ended up costing me more than it really needed to. So it's just those few mistakes holding me back from the A grade, but besides those, I felt like I was really focused, I was really dialed in into what my opponents were doing and their strategies. So overall pretty happy, but just those few mistakes holding me back and putting me at a B+. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the vlog as always. That helps the channel's analytics and I really do appreciate it. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get these vlogs as they do come out to you. And go follow me over on Instagram at Leigh Bets. For now, I'm out of here. Peace.